What's up, Graham? It's Guys here. So today we got to talk about what's happening with one of the most peculiar, misunderstood species on the planet, the millennial. They've been meticulously studied throughout their rather expensive drinking habits, unusual clothing choices, and uncontrolled student loan debt. But now new information has just been revealed which found that 2/3 of millennials regret their home purchase. It's even said that millennials are getting screwed again by the second housing crisis in 12 years. The first from entering a job market in the middle of the Great Recession, and the second when housing prices increased at their fastest rate in, well, pretty much ever. So as a fellow millennial watching all of this happen firsthand, being in real estate full-time over the last 13 years, we gotta talk about these issues and what's going on so you don't make these same mistakes as well. Because I think this one has a lot less to do with the current state of the market and a lot more to do with poor planning and short-sighted mistakes that I think anyone can easily avoid just by watching this video and smashing the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Okay, but in all seriousness, I know I joke about smashing a like button all the time, but for real, it helps me out a ton, and the more likes a video gets, the more likely the YouTube algorithm is to promote it to a brand new audience. So if you want this video to randomly show up in someone's subscription feed who's like, yo, who is this guy and why is his mouth always open in the thumbnails? Just hit the like button, and as a thank you for doing that, here's a picture of a baby giraffe. Alright, so to start things off, as it is right now, things are not looking so good for millennials in terms of their real estate prospects. Business Insider just recently ran an article explaining how millennials just happen to fall into a string of bad luck that worked against them in terms of building wealth. Up first was the entrance to the job market, right as the Great Recession was taking place and mass layoffs became the norm. That led to 10% smaller salaries up front, which didn't fully recover until 10 years after they started working, which would be now. But then just as things were starting to look up, the pandemic hit. That not only fragmented the workforce, but it also drove up real estate prices to the highest level they've ever been in history, with 40% fewer homes on the market today than a year ago, making it nearly impossible to buy a house on reasonable terms. Because shortages across inventory and materials are driving up the price and the competitiveness among offers, millennials are simply getting outnumbered by wealthier, more experienced buyers. And the chief economist of Redfin says that it could take decades until they're able to build enough housing supply to meet all the demand. And today, millennials have the lowest homeownership rate of any prior generation, held back by a lack of saving, expensive housing prices, debt, student loan debt, and more debt. Which is why it's important to understand exactly what's going on so none of this happens to you. Alright, so this all starts with a survey from Bankrate, which tracks the rate of millennial homeownership and the mistakes they make along the way. According to the survey, they say that 26% of millennial homebuyers between the ages of 25 and 31 say their biggest regret was not being prepared for the maintenance and other extra costs associated with homeownership. Which I gotta say, this one really needs to be planned for and expected ahead of time. Like when you're renting, it's easy to assume that unless you go out of your way to break something, chances are your landlord is going to fix it, but when you actually own the home yourself, that's not the case. It's really important to understand that with real estate, your payment doesn't just stop with your mortgage. You're also responsible for property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and the strong likelihood that something is going to break as soon as you buy it. Not to mention, everything in a property has a lifespan where eventually it's going to need to be repaired or replaced. For example, a roof will generally last anywhere from 15 to 25 years, AC units 10 to 15 years, water heaters 8 to 15 years, garbage disposals a few weeks, and so on. And when you begin to average all of those costs throughout the entire term of your home ownership, you're going to start to quickly realize that all of that begins to add up a lot faster than you would expect. So there's a few easy ways around this to make sure you don't fall victim to the same mistake. Number one, a solid home inspection would uncover a lot of these issues before you even buy the house. Just knowing what equipment is near the end of its lifespan and what repairs you're likely going to have to do over the next year is going to leave you a lot more prepared for when those items eventually do break and it's going to cost you money to fix. And second, just expect that your maintenance is going to cost you an extra few $100s a month at minimum on top of your ordinary housing payments for things that just break and need to be fixed because that's life. So just assume your payment is going to be higher than you would expect, set aside a few $100 extra a month for things that will break, and do a home inspection so you know on average what you're going to have to repair. Next, second, even more surprising, 13% of millennials say they have regrets about their mortgage rate being too high or paying too much to buy the house. Which I have to say doesn't really sound like a regret, but instead the consequences of a rushed decision without thorough planning. Now, because technically this is a two-part regret, let's focus on the first one with their mortgage rate being too high. To me, this sounds like a mistake of not shopping around and doing a research to make sure the rate you're being quoted is actually the most competitive rate. Here's the thing, banks almost always have a template that they work from with a standard rate that they they offer you up front, and they're not going to budge from that rate until you give them another lower offer. So if you're trying to get the lowest interest rate, go and get a quote. Take that quote to a second lender and have them beat it. Then take that quote to a third lender to have them beat it again. Then just keep repeating that process over and over and over again until eventually you get the lowest interest rate. Like according to a study in 2018, just going and getting one extra quote saved an average of $1,435, and the borrowers who got 5 quotes saved an average of almost $3,000. And then second, it's expected that in a market like this, it's hard not to feel like you're overpaying for something just for the sake of being able to buy it. But that's a symptom of supply and demand, and ultimately the market is dictated by how much a buyer is willing to pay. The best way that you could prevent this is to have a strict budget in mind ahead of time, and only pay up to the point where you wouldn't mind walking away from the deal if it goes above that amount. This is going to prevent those buyers from getting caught up in the moment or overpaying because they don't want to lose out on the deal, and then realizing that maybe they paid more money than they wanted to. But overall, this regret is easily avoidable ahead of time with just a little forethought and planning. Unlike the next one, which you're not going to know of until you move in. Right, so the next regret listed here was realizing that the home you just bought was not the right fit, and that makes up a significant portion of all homeownership regret. Now, it's really important to realize that in a highly competitive market like this, there will be compromises. And unless you have an unlimited budget of money to create your perfect fairy tale dream home in a good school district without noisy neighbors, you're not going to be able to get everything you want, especially as a millennial. But these regrets listed, in my opinion, are not something that should be happening. From my experience, it's easy to over or underestimate how much space you need when you're looking at a new house, and sometimes life happens and things change. But the reality is this: as a millennial, the house you buy today is unlikely to be the same place you're living 15 to 20 years from now. And on average, according to science, you're probably going to be moving every 13 years or so, if not sooner. So any size setbacks are only temporary. Most of the time, you'll be able to make it work. And there's nothing that says you can't make different adjustments in the future to get the property you've always wanted. Now, as for the location, unless you're buying a house by throwing a dart blindfolded onto a map, this doesn't change, and it's going to be up to you to get to know the area you buy into before you buy it. I have a feeling this regret is a lot more prevalent too, given that 40% of millennials are comfortable buying a home online, maybe before they realize it's not in the best location. That's why I always recommend stopping by the home in the morning, afternoon, and evening, and preferably go and talk to the neighbors. You're going to learn a lot about the neighborhood and which ones like to throw late night parties, which ones start their lawnmower at 5 o'clock in the morning. The area you buy into is really something that should be thoroughly investigated prior to you even writing an offer. And unfortunately, this is something that so many buyers overlook, especially when they're in a rush to go and buy a house. And then finally, the last regret was that 9% of millennials believe the home they bought was not a good investment. And for this one, we really got to dig a little deeper. A few years ago, CNBC ran an article claiming that a record low number of millennials thought that buying a home was a good investment. Now, back then, most respondents said that buying a home was a bad investment because the prices were too high. But that comment didn't really age too well, considering that now today, the median price skyrocketed all the way to $320,000, with other areas up significantly more than that. So now in hindsight, back then housing was actually pretty affordable. But beyond that, 85% simply said that they would expect the down payment to cost more than half of the total value of their personal assets, which is understandably a lot of money. But to say it was a bad investment is a little bit short-sighted, given that over time the price of housing generally goes up. However, does that necessarily mean it's a good way of making money? Well, the traditional rule of thumb says that a mortgage is a great way to act like a forced savings account, because every single month that you make your payment, you're building equity in an appreciating asset. But to really come up with an accurate answer, you're going to have to compare that with the cost of renting and the opportunity cost of investing your money somewhere else. Now, in order to do all of this math for yourself, the New York Times created this calculator which determines every aspect of home ownership to tell you if it's cheaper to buy or rent based on your own neighborhood and tax bracket. And to make things interesting, I'll run down a realistic scenario of the place that I'm living in today to see whether or not it's cheaper to buy or rent. Right now, it's worth $1,750,000. We'll stay here 10 years. I got a 2.85% mortgage for 30 years. My investment should return 8%, inflation 2.5%, and property taxes 0.87%. Then after the closing costs, this calculator says that if I could rent this house for $5,440 a month or less, then renting is better. Which I gotta say, the market value of this house is probably $9,000 a month, which means that in this scenario, I am better off buying this house than I am renting. But if I sold this house in 2 years, then renting the same house would be cheaper by almost $1,500 a month. Or if I stayed here longer but I averaged 20% from my investments, then renting would also be cheaper because I have less money tied up in the home. Or if home prices stayed flat over the next 5 years, then renting would still be cheaper. So as you can see, there are plenty of scenarios here in which renting is simply the better option. But not always, which is why you need to take everything into consideration to figure out what's a better option for you. And understand that just because you buy a home doesn't automatically mean it's always going to be a good investment. So overall, here's my take on this as a millennial. I generally encourage anyone who's buying a house to do so with the expectation of living there at least 5 to 8 years. Otherwise, the closing cost of buying and selling a house eat away at all the advantages of buying a house in the short term. It's also incredibly important to understand why you're buying a house in the first place and the problems that's going to solve for you. Like, is it a way to save money, get more space, put down roots, or maybe it's a good investment? If it doesn't fall in one of those categories, then chances are you should be looking elsewhere. I also recommend anytime you're about to buy anything, never max out what you can afford. That way, in the event of a job loss or a decline in income, you're never going to have to worry about making your payments. And when you begin putting all of this into perspective from every single one of the 63% of millennial regrets, it sounds more like an issue of poor planning than actually buying the home itself. All of these regrets could have been easily avoided with a day of research and planning. And even more than that could have been fixed with the evaluation of whether or not they're buying a house for the right reasons. Even though buying a house could absolutely be a good investment, it doesn't automatically happen that way. And just because you buy a home doesn't always mean it's going to make you money. It's reasonable to expect that as a homeowner, you're going to have to make some compromises. You're not going to get the home you've always wanted, and that's okay. Use this as a stepping stone to learn, get used to the idea of home ownership, and over time you could slowly trade up to the house that you've always wanted. Like the Austin dream house that you could win from Omaze. So with that said, you guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, make sure to destroy the like button, subscribe button, and notification bell. Also, feel free to add me on Instagram. I post pretty much daily, so if you want to be a part of it there, feel free to add me there as my second channel, The Graham Stephan Show. I post there every single day. I'm not posting here. So if you want to see a brand new video from me every single day, make sure to add yourself to that. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.